Asmongold is wrong. I'm sorry, but he's just actually wrong about this, and I'm gonna tell you why. Okay, guys, so I'm sorry for starting this off with such a charged statement, but today Asmon released on Twitter basically his wish list for a Classic Fresh, a bunch of things he wants for Classic Fresh. And so before you guys dive in on the comments about your opinions on this particular issue, please just hear me out. I do ask you to please listen to this first before you actually go in and give your full opinion here. And then secondly, I do want to mention that I think there are some insanely great ideas in this, and I hope Blizzard is looking at this. I hope the Warcraft devs are looking at what Asmon actually posted today, as well as looking at some of the videos that are coming out recently about what the community really wants for Classic Fresh and how we can actually improve it. So with that being said, let's dive right into things. And one last thing, and I just was struggling kind of trying to decide on releasing this video, but I really do feel strongly about this. But Asmon did respond to my response to his Twitter, and I fully agree. If we could actually get the Blizzard devs to revamp all of the content, making it completely harder, and the new content making it all extremely more, like a lot more challenging, to be honest, then this entire video wouldn't really be needed. But there's no way, almost no way, that Blizzard is actually going to allocate the resources to fully revamp the game like that. So with that being said, please do pay attention to this video. Don't really judge things until we actually get into it, because nothing really is dove into until about halfway in the real arguments for this reasoning, or the reasoning why I think that he's wrong with this point. And it's not necessarily just charged directly at Asmon, of course, because he just has such a large influence over the community that with this one particular issue, I think it is really, really important for us to look at it from all angles. Okay, so here we are with the wish list that Asmon posted on Twitter, and I think he made it on his stream earlier. And again, there's some insanely great ideas here. Things like no debuff limits, rebalancing classes so that there's actually some excitement to play some of the classes that get no love in Classic, like actually making Rets have an ability they can use so that they're fun to play instead of just sitting there waiting for procs. Make it so that they can seal twist, things like that. Other classes that could be really useful would be like giving hunters maybe even steady shot, maybe balancing classes with different talents, just a whole different balancing change to make this game really fun. Aside from all of the really good ideas that are in this list, and I don't want to dive in too much into my opinion on all of these, but the one thing I think is going to be the most controversial, and the one thing that I think is really game breaking and will ruin the game, or actually for a lot of people, but really it will have a trickle down effect, is to ostracize the actual hardcore players of this game. And to do that, that would be to remove world buffs. So a lot of people are asking for no world buffs for TBC Classic. I'm not necessarily sure if it is a vocal minority or the vocal majority of people, but today I'm going to give you guys some reasons why you might think it's a good idea. And it kind of is in the ether of the ideas where you're like, God, losing world buffs sucks, having to get world buffs sucks. All of that is really a pain. But those aren't really the core issue here with world buffs in World of Warcraft Classic. If you're asking for the game to be harder, that's fine. But removing world buffs in general isn't really helping the issue, and it's actually going to hurt the game. Well, first, let me talk about what are some of the really annoying things with world buffs. So in the background, I have Noob's world record Nax run here. So one of the most annoying things with world buffs is that with world buffs, you can't even play your class. You can't play your character. If you are world buffed, you have to basically raid log. You get your buffs early, and then you can't play the game for the rest of the week. This is inherently an issue, and this was kind of remedied at the end of WoW Classic with the Chrono Boon Displacer. So I'm really glad that Blizzard added this. If they would have added it earlier, I think a lot of people wouldn't have quit the game. Now, I don't think you could start the game with the Chrono Boon Displacer, actually. I don't think you could start the game having it in, at least not at 10 gold, because the cost of 10 gold in phase 1 is going to be a massive gold cost. So you can't actually start the game with that. That's a massive gold sink. So maybe having it in either for free or for like 1 gold, and then as different phases come out, scale it up in gold, then we could potentially see some use out of this item, or seeing it really be a remedy to us not being able to play our characters during the raid week. Now, another issue with world buffs really was just getting them dispelled. Losing your world buffs was so frustrating. Just world buffs being dispellable is one of the most annoying parts of this game. It did add a very fresh aspect to the game. There was a social aspect to it, but there were some people that obviously play this game 100% just sitting dead in Orgrimmar, sitting in dead in Stormwind, waiting there for someone to hearth or get summoned to a raid, and then so that they would just get dispelled. They would be sitting there in corpse waiting for someone to be there and just insta target like a main tank with like a weak aura or a macro and just dispel them. This is absolutely the way that some people played the game, so it's a way that some people enjoyed the game, but it's also a massive frustration for a lot of people playing this game, and it meant that you had to really work around this and find intuitive ways to get your world buffs. But it also added this frustration that I think if we're playing Classic again, a lot of people can probably agree that we don't need to deal with spending hours and hours trying to get these world buffs again just for the fear of losing them. Past this is the issue of world buffs really only buffing one class or one type of class, really. World buffs really buffed melee. Now, if you lost a mage or something, if you were a mage or a caster and you lost your world buffs, or even like a healer and you lost your world buffs, it wasn't a massive deal. That's because world buffs scale so insanely well with melee, because they are all skewed towards melee for the most part. Getting huge amounts of attack power, getting melee haste even, this is going to all just buff the melee, and that buffed the best class in Classic, which is obviously the warrior. So it forced everyone to play warrior and get world buffs. So this is one of the most annoying things. If world buffs would have just been scaled to make all classes actually get enough of an advantage from them, then you wouldn't be forced to only go warrior potentially. Unfortunately, warriors as a class are just kind of stronger and innately better for speedrunning or for a lot of content than other classes, but that just means Blizzard needs to do some class balancing. And that's kind of outside of the scope of this video, but I just want to mention that is a thing, of course. And the last really huge problem I have, or I think a lot of people have with world buffs, was you had to sit there waiting for someone to drop a world buff for hours sometimes, only to barely miss it when you looked away from your computer to log over to your main. And then now you have a 6-hour cooldown to try to get the buff again. Now, this is super frustrating and really not an intuitive way to play the game if we're playing it for a second time, or I guess a third time, where a lot of people are going to be really frustrated. You don't want to spend all of your time doing this. We want to be able to play this game and enjoy it if there's going to be a Classic fresh. So that can be remedied with, I don't know, buff vendors or buffs on time. I don't really have the exact solution for this. Maybe not even a buff like CD. But again, that is one of the most frustrating parts about world buffs. But let me tell you why world buffs are so important for this game. Now, if you remove world buffs, you're no longer going to have hardcore players. There's no competitive scene at the top level of this game because it is going to be content that's already been out. Even if you add new dungeons, if you add some new raids, for the most part, there's not going to be a competitive scene in this game. There currently isn't any sort of competitive PvP in this game, which he did suggest adding potentially arenas or better yet rated battlegrounds, which could be tied into the ranking system because nobody wants to rank again if we get this game again. That's just an entire another job for like 3 months. So that's an amazing idea to have another competitive scene within this game. But the scene of speedrunning was huge within Classic WoW. I think you all know that if you watch this channel, but that was a massive scene and a lot of people wanted to participate in it or watch it. Also, if you had world buffs yourself, you were having a ton of fun parsing. So this was like a version of the game that added more fun. But yes, there are these struggles with getting world buffs. The second thing, the biggest thing I think for having world buffs and the reason why if you remove them, you're removing the competitive scene, is the risk reward factor. So there's two big ties in here. So imagine any sort of speedrun or any sort of raid in WoW Classic. You have this risk reward factor. How much can you pump? How much can you push as a DPS without pulling aggro, without dying? How much can you stay in on a boss without getting away from a mechanic before you die? As a rogue, how close can you be in until you have to vanish an ability that would otherwise kill you? This risk reward factor, where if you die, you lose your world buffs, it's over. Your raid is basically done. This isn't just for speedruns itself, but this is for everyone's individual raid. If you have your world buffs throughout the whole raid, you have an awesome raid, you're really excited. The game feels great. It's so much fun. But if you have no world buffs and you're playing a class like a warrior, you're getting almost no rage, the game just isn't nearly as fun. And innately, one of the most fun things in PvE of this game is to pump. Innately, if you don't have world buffs, that means that there's no risk reward factor. And that's what made things like sitting on the edge of your seat. Anytime you were watching a speedrun, anytime you were watching a race to world first, you were sitting on the edge of your seat, because it wasn't the first time we're seeing this content, at least for most people. It wasn't the first time some of these people are even doing this content. But if you take something like speedruns or even the races to world first, there's no real thrill in it if there's not a high risk reward factor. So with this content being something that's already been out, if you're going in and say like a guild like Salad Bakers went in to the race to world first of Naxxramas and actually wiped on the second pull. They were the guild that already had the world fastest Naxxramas clear on private servers, but they actually wiped on the first pull. It was such an upset, allowing Progress to just go through and breeze through to get the world first clear. Again, obviously this is like 20-year-old content, but to get the first clear in Classic of Naxxramas. Salad Bakers still ended up with no world buffs, getting like third, but it was so high octane. And then if you go into any speed runs, some of the speed runs, you could never pull off some of the crazier strats without world buffs. So then if you're at the beginning of a speed run and one of your biggest DPS pumpers, which would probably be a warrior, actually dies, then you're already going to lose so much overall damage throughout the raid that it is hurting the speedrun in itself. So there's this really big risk reward factor that was something that I think was the biggest draw to any sort of hardcore player in WoW Classic. That's really what it was. And speedruns also gave us infamous moments. Like if something went wrong, there was so many fun moments where if something like a progress speedrun in AQ was started, and then they decided just to casually not kill one mob that was gonna end the entire run before they even started the raid, really. This is on the second pull, and that was it. Literally, the entire speedrun was over. And this was so fun. Everybody watching, people going crazy. So this really adds or opens up World of Warcraft Classic into being something that can be kind of a competitive scene, where we did things like the Raid Masters actual tournament, where you can go in and have a competitive tournament where people race to get speedruns against each other and try to get the best time. So we can finally have some sort of actual competitive scene in WoW Classic. Okay, so that's really the most part. I think I covered almost everything I can think of. I probably left things out, and that's really unfortunate when you're trying to make a video kind of like this, but I didn't really write it all down. I just kind of wanted to let you guys know everything. I am sorry for starting the video by really targeting Asmon's post, but really, he is a massive community leader. A lot of people look at him and see what he's talking about and then take it to heart. And so if the Warcraft devs actually take all of the things he's saying to heart, then there's going to be kind of some major issues. I do want to thank you guys for tuning in to this whole video and hopefully waiting till the end before you really give your opinion. And you can let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. But of course, I know you don't like world buffs or the world buff meta because you're probably frustrated because you've lost these world buffs. But you really have to think about what the world buffs bring. How fun is it to play with world buffs? Is there going to be any sort of competitive scene without world buffs? Are there going to be any sort of hardcore guilds playing the game? You can choose to just play the game without world buffs. There was a lot of guilds out there that were world buffless guilds, and they were proud of it. And they were proud, and some of them were going for their speed clears or how fast they can clear the content without world buffs. Now, this basically is an innate way to buff the content, of course, make the content harder for yourselves right away without even having to have Blizzard do anything. And so now instead of clearing Nax in 40 minutes for the world record, you're clearing Nax in 2 hours for a world record. That's great. There's so many different ways to play this game. The options, I think, are where this game should shine. And taking away world buffs just completely cuts off this top level of the game, right? This top level of speed. Like the content, we're going to beat it no matter what. It's an older game. Let's be honest. It's not the most challenging. So what do we have to do? We have to really make it this high risk reward factor. We have to be watching something that's on the edge of our seats. We have to be participating in a raid, trying to see how far we can push it until we lose something. And on that note, of course, the speedrun circus was probably the best because it was that week when the Darkwing Fair was out where all of the runs were happening. Instead of them just being able to happen whenever, it was 1 week a month. And it was really exciting. So to Blizzard and the community, guys, I really want to say, I think world buffs need to stay in the game if a classic fresh version starts up. I think there's a lot of great ways to change the game. I think there's a lot of great suggestions in Asmongold's post even. There's amazing suggestions. Take them all to heart and look at all of them. But this particular issue, I think, is genuinely going to hurt the game and hurt the player base overall. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm sorry for talking about such a controversial topic. I hope you have a great day, guys. I'll see you all in the next one.